At the same time, the militarization of AI on the American side now is creating a new circumstance where cooperation becomes both urgent and as well as difficult. With that said, however, just because that the issue is so burning, is so urgent, that the two parties really need to find a way, right? And we have seen historical cases where, for example, during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, they had a very high level of confrontation, but nonetheless they were able to sit down and talk about the escalation of the nuclear competition, right? Obviously, AI technology is different from nuclear technology, but that doesn't mean there's nothing we can do about, right? For example, the track 2 diplomacy can play a very critical role when the formal delegations between two governments are hard to see eye to eye with each other, right? Semi-government organizations or think tanks and university scholars can meet more frequently to set the agenda, to keep as open as possible in their negotiations and discussions and exchanges, which can, gradually shape a possible agenda for both governments to sit down eventually to talk about. Well, you could also have multilateral institutions playing a more critical role, right? And for example, a third country, right, or a regional institution like BRICS or other institutions can all be very critical in creating a momentum for both parties to sit down with each other. But overall, I think the necessity and urgency are very high level right now because of the fast speed of technological development in artificial intelligence. So the two parties can take advantage of this upcoming visit by the two heads of states in Beijing to really figure out at least a plan for the respective government officials to move on forward with a possible negotiation or discussion in the future.
Victor, can I circle back to the Taiwan question? Because China has made itself abundantly clear on this issue. There's no budging here. This is the core of China's core interests, a red line that simply cannot be crossed. And we've heard from the Trump administration, we've heard from Donald Trump himself that he respects this stance by China. He respects China. He respects the Chinese leader. When he's in town this time, how will the two sides approach this issue? Because regrettably, the U.S. has continued to sell arms to Taiwan, at times undermining the one China principle. What will Beijing want to hear from Donald Trump this time on this issue?
Well, it is important to note that before he left Washington, D.C., President Trump, in answering to questions raised by some journalists, said, the United States, continental the United States, is about 10,000 miles away from Taiwan, using his term, and mainland China is only about less than 100 miles away from Taiwan. I think his message is clear. Taiwan is so far away from the United States. Why should we bother that much about Taiwan? And Taiwan has been recognized by the United States as being part of China ever since 1971. Again, 1972, and especially after 1979, when China-U.S. relations were normalized, and it has been consistently recognized by each of the successive governments in the United States. So I think President Trump may have all the incentives to do the right thing. Don't use Taiwan as a chip.
There he is, Victor. President Donald Trump of the United States in China after 9 years. This is the first visit to China by a U.S. president in 9 years' time. This is also Trump's first state visit to China since his re-election, and the second time President Xi has hosted him in the country. Beijing says Chinese President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump will have an in-depth exchange of views on major issues concerning bilateral relations and world peace and development. Senior Chinese officials visiting U.S. President Donald Trump at the airport there in Beijing. The president's plane touching down moments ago. Both the Chinese and American leaders met last time in October last year in the Republic of Korea's second largest city, Busan. Beijing says the head of state diplomacy plays an irreplaceable strategic guiding role in China-U.S. relations. China is willing to work with the United States in the spirit of equality, respect, and mutual benefit to expand cooperation, manage differences, and inject more stability and certainty into a turbulent and changing world. It is 8:10 p.m. here in the Chinese capital. We're looking at pictures from the airport in Beijing, where President Donald Trump has just landed. He's talking and shaking hands with senior Chinese officials who are meeting him there, welcoming him there at the airport in Beijing. And again, this is the first visit to China by U.S. President in 9 years, the first by Donald Trump since his re-entry into the White House. We have yet to find out specific topics that are on the table between the two presidents this time, but word is that the two presidents will have an in-depth exchange of views on major issues concerning bilateral relations, world peace, and development. Make sure you stay with us here on CGTN as we bring you the latest on the state visit by U.S. President Donald Trump. Again, we mentioned that President Donald Trump is traveling with a massive business delegation, reportedly with business leaders from sectors such as finance, technology, agriculture, and aviation. In the next couple of days, we will see who is accompanying President Trump, this time to China. The military band there as a part of the ceremony there at the airport in Beijing. And this is the official start of President Donald Trump's visit to China. It's a 3-day trip that will see President Donald Trump engage in in-depth exchanges and talks with his Chinese counterpart. Gentlemen, I want to briefly recap what was achieved by the two presidents' last meeting in Busan, Republic of Korea, towards the end of last year. We mentioned how during that meeting, some of the frictions in trade, some of the frictions on tech were eased. If you look at the business delegation this time, do you think it's possible that the two will move forward on the issue of trade, move forward on the issue of technology, Victor?
First of all, on the basis of reciprocity, yes, I have great hope because everything should be done with each other on a reciprocal basis. It is highly unlikely that major progress can be made if the United States wants to impose unilateral, one-sided demand on China without reciprocating for the Chinese requests or demands. So this reciprocity will be absolutely tested tomorrow during important state-to-state visits and heads of state discussions. And I hope eventually we can reach more and more agreement on reciprocity. And on that basis, I think the Chinese market demand for American products will be the largest in the world and will be unmatched by any other country. And hopefully President Trump will really deliver wonderful results for the American businesses, business owners, companies of all kinds, because they can really have great confidence and expectation to sell more goods and products to the China market. On the other hand, I do hope President Trump will demonstrate courage and wisdom and resourcefulness in dealing with this Taiwan issue. Taiwan issue should not be a major obstacle in China-US relations, especially as President Trump correctly pointed it out. Taiwan is so far away from the United States and is just within inches of China, so why should it become an obstacle preventing and not enabling but preventing China and the United States to achieve greater common goods for the Chinese people and the American people? I believe this will be one of the most important litmus tests tomorrow for the two heads of state to talk about. Other than that, there are so many other issues they will talk about. And from President Trump, side, I hope he will raise this Iran issue and the Chinese president will tell him the right way to end the war immediately. That will be a blessing for the American people as well as mankind as a whole, to end the war right now.
I believe we'll be hearing from President Donald Trump soon on his feelings arriving in China this time. We have yet to get to the topic of people-to-people exchanges between China and the United States, a fitting question for Professor Wan here. In this critical time, I mean, both sides have obviously realized the value of the exchange of personnel between the two sides. In broad terms, what do you think are the value of encouraging more people-to-people exchanges on a cultural level, on an academic level between China and the United States?
Well, I think people-to-people exchange on the ground is extremely important because, especially in today's world, where many young people are exposed to social media, and so you can have a problem of information compartmentalization, which means that whatever you view on social media, you can keep being fed with similar information, which means that we're living in information holes where people can have very, very isolated and biased information. So what's happening in the United States, for example, is that China is being portrayed as some sort of demon, right? And for various reasons. And so that biased and blemished image and incorrect image needs to be corrected. And the best way, I think, to correct that image is to promote more exchanges between Chinese and the Americans, right? And by the way, this should not be a one-way street. And the President Xi has invited thousands of American young people every year to come to visit China, study in China, and travel in China. But like I said, it shouldn't be a one-way street. And I think the United States government also needs to make sure that its visa policy is more friendly. Its custom entry policy needs to be more friendly to international visitors, including those from China, because only so that the Chinese tourists are more willing to spend money traveling in the United States, right? And the Chinese students are more willing to study abroad over there. But another way is that the Chinese government has also made it much more open for the American students to study abroad. For example, my university has offered many English-taught programs, both undergraduate and graduate programs, opening to international students who are more than willing to welcome applicants from Americans.
Victor, do you recall that initiative put forward by President Xi to invite more young Americans to come to China for study programs, for exchange programs? I hear that's going extremely well. And if you talk to those students, their perceptions of China prior to their trip and their impressions of China after they come is very, very interesting. Talk to us about your opinions on the value of these programs.
Well, I remember several years ago when China-U.S. relations were really very, very low in the deep freeze, especially during President Biden's term. President Xi Jinping made one important remark. He said we should place the best hope for improving China-U.S. relations on the people-to-people exchanges, especially among the younger people. Meaning we want to have more young Americans come to China to visit, to attend colleges like in your great university, for example, and elsewhere, and also just to travel around to see what China is really about. We are not demons, as some of the anti-China personalities in the United States want to portray us. We are not anti-Americans. I think the Chinese people are very friendly towards the American people. So for every American to come to China and to see China with his or her own eyes will be a moment of truth. They will see China in the right prism rather than through the distortion of some of the anti-China elements in the United States. I think this really has turned out to be absolutely correct. For more Chinese people to go to see America as it is, for Americans to come to see us, the Chinese, and China as a country, the way we are really all about, will be turning the table and will make sure China-U.S. friendship will be long-lasting and we will be able to overcome whatever challenges there are and differences, which are plenty, but we are not afraid, we do not fear these differences. I think we can build on our common interests to maximize our common benefits to make sure China and the United States will remain friends with each other and partners, as President Xi described, rather than adversaries or competitors or even enemies against each other.
I mean, our reporters have been talking to some of these American students who made their way to China, and it's so wonderful to hear them say, at the end of the day, people really are more the same than they're different. At the end of the day, we're all just people who wish to be seen, who wish to be heard, who wish to engage with the rest of the world. Another question on this front, Professor Wang, I mean, academic exchanges were also reduced to a smaller level, a smaller scale a couple of years ago. And the first thing I noticed when relations were starting to rebound between the two sides is that academic exchanges were on the rise between Chinese and American educational institutions. Do you feel the same, that the academic personnel exchanges have rebounded between the two sides?
Right, and I do recognize that we went through some ups and downs, and but even during the downtime, probably, the situation was not as bad as people would think. For example, I personally was able to have a academic visit for a year in the United States from 2023 to 2024. Which was a very rewarding experience personally and academically for myself. In more recent years, obviously, we have seen the temperature coming back and exchanges are becoming more and more. Why? Because both parties have interest in each other. Have interest in learning about each other. The American scholars, students, and American academia overall are interested in understanding China, Chinese economy, Chinese politics, as well as culture, right? And vice versa. Here you have a lot of very curious and open-minded Chinese people who wanted to know more about what's happening in the United States. And to be frank, American culture has always been very popular here in China. And now in recent years, we are seeing a trend that the Chinese culture and Chinese fashion are becoming more and more popular in the United States, right? The Chinese coffee shops are opening up in New York City, in La Bubu, and the Chinese and other Chinese toys are becoming such a frenzy trend in the U.S. as well as in the other parts of the world. And also the Chinese video games are really attractive now internationally, and including American young people. So all in all, I see that the cultural exchanges are needed, are demanded by both parties, and I'm seeing that this trip by President Trump to Beijing is going to really be helpful in making the overall environment more cooperative and more friendly between the two parties for more exchanges, especially by the young people.
Victor, here's an interesting one. You're active on social media, and trending topics such as becoming Chinese or China maxing have been really embraced by young social media users around the world, and including in the United States. Do you think these open people's eyes to a China they might not have known before? Do you think that helped to debunk some of the myths people, hear about China?
Absolutely. I think the recent experience is very obvious. For many Americans who have never come to China, and for them to make a first visit to China, China becomes a culture shock. Why? Why are they shocked about? Because they were being brainwashed by the distortions and fabrications and false accusations about China. So they thought China was not the reality in China as we are. They even fear that China has been portrayed as demons with horns, and once they arrive in China, they see China as what we are, and they see the real China. And they see China as not backward, for example, unsophisticated, lack of culture, etc. China is just the opposite. We are now highly developed. We are the most industrialized economy in the world, pushing to the forefront of technological innovation and entrepreneurship. We are the champion of defending free trade. So they are shocked. They see China completely different from what China was portrayed by their media, reporting, for example, and also by some people who claim to be China experts. So I think this culture shock is the positive culture shock. I think they have been awakened to the reality about China, and they are so enthusiastic, so excited to tell the China they saw to their family members, to their friends, classmates in the United States. That's the beginning of becoming Chinese. They want to taste and try everything China, Chinese cuisine, Chinese culture, and they feel absolutely safe in China. They can walk around, wander around midnight or in the wee hours of the day without fearing for their safety. They sometimes left some luggage and coming back hours later, the luggage is still there, not being taken away. So I think this is the reality they are experiencing about China. And I do hope more and more people from the United States will come to see China as it is. And I hope China and the United States eventually can reach an agreement for mutual visa exemption. So more Americans can come to China, more Chinese can go to see the real United States.
A lot to hope for, gentlemen. We appreciate your company tonight. Thank you so much for your insight and your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is all we have for now. CGTN will have comprehensive coverage of Donald Trump's state visit to China. Make sure you do stay with us. Thank you so much for watching. Coming to you from Beijing, this is China 24, a look at China and its impact around the world. I'm Zhong Shi. On our broadcast tonight, U.S. President Donald Trump arrives in Beijing for a 3-day state visit to China. In today's China Watch, we take a look at how smart technologies are making daily life easier for elderly people. Plus, China's 2026 box office revenue surpasses 14 billion yuan, or around $2 billion US dollars. At the top of our broadcast today, U.S. President Donald Trump has arrived in Beijing for a state visit to China. At the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping, Trump is visiting China from May the 13th to the 15th. This is the two leaders' second face-to-face meeting after they met in Busan, the Republic of Korea, last October. This is also the first visit to China by a U.S. president in 9 years. President Xi and his U.S. counterpart Trump will have an in-depth exchange of views on major issues concerning bilateral relations and world peace and development. Chinese President Xi Jinping has outlined 3 core principles to build a healthy and sustainable relationship between the world's 2 largest economies. First, mutual respect, which serves as the prerequisite for bilateral interactions. This requires respect for each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity, socio-political systems, and development paths. Second, peaceful coexistence, which acts as the baseline of the relationship. It stresses avoiding conflict and confrontation and managing differences through open dialogue. Last but not least, a win-win cooperation. It's defined as the goal forward. President Xi has emphasized in multiple occasions that China and the U.S. can achieve mutual success and shared prosperity, benefiting both countries and the wider world. He also urges the 2 sides to join hands in tackling global challenges. And the Chinese ambassador to the United States, Xie Feng, has discussed President Trump's upcoming visit in bilateral relations in an interview. Ambassador Xie expressed hope that the upcoming summit in Beijing will help stabilize bilateral relations and find a way for both countries to coexist with mutual respect and cooperation. He added that he believes the American people who have experienced division and civil war can understand China's commitment to safeguarding national unity. Ambassador Xie suggested that China and the U.S. should engage in healthy competition like a track and field race toward mutual excellence, rather than a zero-sum boxing match. He also noted that recent social trends such as becoming Chinese and China maxing show a growing desire for exchange between the peoples of both nations. Let's talk about this with my guests here in the studio. Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, Chair Professor Soochow University, as well as Wang Xinsong, Associate Professor at Beijing Normal University School of Government. Gentlemen, thanks so much for sticking around. Victor, starting with you, Trump last visited China in 2017. He's now visiting in his second term as U.S. President. What do you think will be different this time on his state visit?
Well, first of all, allow me to say welcome, Your Excellency, President Trump, to your second important state visit to China. Have a good rest tonight. Tomorrow you have a full day of very important discussions with the Chinese President Xi Jinping about China-US relations as well as about global issues. Secondly, I think China today is much stronger, much more influential, and China has become the champion defending peace for mankind as well as free trade. China today is much more impactful than China was 9 years ago, back in 2017. So I hope President Trump will recognize this fact and will engage with China on equal terms for mutual benefit, for the benefit of the American people as well as for the Chinese people. On the Chinese side, we have all the incentives to cooperate with the United States, and it is also for the purpose of mutual benefit. So I think, and I hope President Trump will appreciate this and will reciprocate the Chinese goodwill and the commitment to promoting China-US cooperation.
Professor Wang, we talked about how the world could benefit from a more stable and healthy China-US relationship. When the rest of the world watches this visit by Donald Trump, what do you think are most important, interesting to them?
Well, I think the rest of the world is obviously looking for some certainty and predictability in terms of relations between the two greatest powers in the world, because the healthy and peaceful relations between China and the U.S. are going to set a very important stage for the rest of the world in terms of economy, security, as well as global governance on many of the burning issues, right? Economically, a cooperative trade relations, investment relations between the two countries are going to benefit the rest of the world, because today the global economy is in ecosystems, and we're talking about supply chains on almost every manufactured product. So when the two countries, China and US, cooperate with each other, the other parties, manufacturers, businesses, and countries and governments on the supply chains at various positions are all going to benefit from it. Right? Security-wise, I think the two countries are stabilizing forces, and if the two countries are de-escalating the relations into some sort of uncertainty, this is going to create a very unfortunate environment for the rest of the world. Only by the two parties working with each other, dialogues are possible, more negotiations can happen, right? And then global issues. We're faced with many burning issues, such as climate change and governance of artificial intelligence, et cetera, all these issues are being watched over by the rest of the world, and I'm sure are going to appear on the agenda in the meetings between the two parties.
Mr. Trump coming to Beijing itself is a symbolism of both the US and China trying to recreate a strategic framework on the basis of which they can engage themselves, as well as finding a way during this year in particularly how they can take that relationship to a qualitatively different place and a qualitatively different level that is moving forward on the basis of Mr. Trump's visit to Beijing.
Let's talk about recent ties between the two sides. Over the past year, China and the U.S. have seen a rebound in both high-level exchanges and working-level consultations. What do you think are the key factors that have helped sustain and deepen this engagement?
That is a common factor with the factor we had in those previous 40 years when that relationship was succeeding for the most part, and that is that it must be leader-led. Leader-led diplomacy is the steering wheel of US-China relations for the past 50 years. And when this relationship has moved forward, even in these past difficult 10 years, it has been when the leaders have chosen to do so. I think the Chinese leadership has always been ready to have a stable, peaceful, productive, and coexistent relationship with the US. The US leadership has been wishy-washy in this regard. And where Mr. Trump has chosen to go towards right from the get-go, the first few months had his tariffs, et cetera, but viewed through Mr. Trump's lens, that was to create the leverage to then engage the Chinese. It is leaders-led diplomacy which has steered this relationship forward.
China and the United States are still important trade partners. China remained the United States' third largest export destination and third largest import source, while the U.S. is China's top export destination and the third largest source of imports. U.S. companies in China are showing sustained confidence in the market despite global headwinds. The latest survey of the American Chamber of Commerce in China shows half of U.S. firms still rank China among their top 3 investment destinations. 83% of member companies say positive U.S.-China relations are crucial to their China operations. 79% hold a positive or neutral outlook on bilateral relations for 2026, and that's up 30 percentage points from last year. AmCham China President Michael Hart says China remains a vital part of most U.S. companies' supply chains, and the rise of Chinese consumers and market opening reforms offer long-term growth opportunities. The American Chamber of Commerce in South China has expressed optimism about U.S. President Donald Trump's day visit to China. Harley Sayedin, president of the chamber, spoke with CGTN reporter Zheng Sunwu in Guangzhou.
So, Mr. Harley, with the Donald Trump's visit to China this time, what positive signals or changes will this visit bring to Southern China's appeal for international investment?
Well, American Chamber of Commerce in South China has over 2,300 members, which account for about 40% of all U.S.-China business trade and investment. Therefore, his trip is extremely important to us, and we're very excited about the fact that he's coming. Certainty is extremely important in business, and I do believe that his trip will bring about certainty on a number of issues, especially on investment and cooperation and sales. And I think we will do very well with the fact that he's here. The Greater Bay Area, which consists of Hong Kong, Macau, and 9 cities on the mainland, has a GDP of 2.1 trillion US dollars. I think the fact that President Trump is here is going to signal that we can continue to expand our business, we can continue to cooperate with our Chinese partners, and prosper and benefit from the opportunities that will be available.
And we know despite the global trade fluctuations, our economic ties remain strong. So in your view, how will this visit affect the resilience of economic ties between our two countries?
I do believe that his arrival will signal better cooperation in many, many new areas. What this will result is of course, reduction of tariffs. I do expect that, reduction in tariff levels, that's going to be very important. 77% of the members of the American Chamber of Commerce based in South China are not in the export business anymore. They are primarily here importing from the United States components and parts and products and manufacturing in China for the Chinese market. So the Chinese market has become very important to us, and therefore President Trump's visit, his cooperation with President Xi Jinping, his meetings are going to be extremely beneficial in our ability to penetrate the Chinese market even in a greater way than we have in the past.
So amid China's green industrial upgrades, what opportunities do you see this visit will bring for the U.S. companies in areas such as digital economy, healthcare, etc.?
China is developing new technologies from which we can benefit by cooperating with our Chinese partners. EVs, batteries, as well as healthcare. China is now the leading innovator of new drugs. We know that we can work together with China on many clinical trials in development of new technology. We can work together in AI areas. We think that AI is not necessarily just defense. It is an area that's very important to business going forward. In addition to that, there are just about every consumer product that you can imagine that we provide here in China, and we're going to continue to do that.
And let's pick up our conversation with my guests here in the studio, beginning with you, Professor Wang. More than a dozen U.S. business in Donald Trump's delegation this time to Beijing. Economically, what do you think is their objective on this trip?
Well, if you look at the 17 major companies coming, whose representatives are coming with President Trump to Beijing, and they're divided into several groups, right? And one is a group of companies that already have a lot of businesses in China. Chinese market is a very important part of their business, right? And that includes the agricultural company and aviation company like Boeing, right? And another group is a group of companies who are buying for the Chinese market, and they're not yet fully integrated, but they're looking out for opportunities. And for example, the finance companies, which have some sort of links with the Chinese business and the Chinese market, but not fully. And then you have technology companies that are competing with Chinese companies, at the same time looking out for opportunities. Like Jensen Huang in the last minute joined the delegation, and between NVIDIA and the Chinese market is a very complicated story, right? And a very large share of the Chinese chip market, but because of the export restrictions imposed by both Trump administration and Biden administration, NVIDIA is losing a lot of market share. And so NVIDIA, as well as other technology companies in the US, are still looking out for market opportunities in China. That's why they're so interested in joining the delegation. But I would like to say that this relations should not be one-way street, and many Chinese companies also looking out for opportunities to invest in the United States, but for various reasons, and such opportunities is becoming limited. Let's take EV as an example. China is the largest and most successful EV producer across the world, but the American government is still having a lot of limits in terms of importing Chinese EVs. So overall, I think the visit by President Trump to Beijing is going to set a good stage for discussions, negotiations on bilateral economic, trade, and investment relations, so that business, as well as workers, right, and their families are going to benefit from the bilateral trade economic relations.
The joining of Jensen Huang really has sparked attention and interest and curiosity in whether the Trump administration could possibly loosen some of these restrictions on tech exports to China. Victor, your thoughts on this?
Well, I have a different reading about the ups and downs of Jensen Huang's joining or not of this presidential visit. Why? Because realistically speaking, Jensen Huang and his company, NVIDIA, has become a victim of the wrong policy initiated by the Trump administration, intensified by the Biden administration, and again reinforced by the Trump administration 2.0. Why? Because NVIDIA was doing brisk businesses with China. China accounts for up to about 20% of his businesses. So he's making a lot of money, and the money he made from China has really contributed to his expansion and financing his technological innovations. But the US government forced him to give away, to sabotage his biggest customer. That's absolutely the wrong strategy. In Chinese, we have a saying, you lift up a rock and drop it on your own feet. Is that right? So I think Jensen Huang has been desperate. He tried to lobby the US government to give him exemption, to allow him to export to the Chinese market. The US government policy prohibited him out blank, then relaxed a little bit, and then tried to ask him to give different versions or weakened versions of the products to such an extent that the Chinese government eventually prohibited Chinese companies from buying GPUs from NVIDIA. Why? Because the US government and the US Congress insisted that GPUs like what produced by NVIDIA need to open back door to allow American intervention in the operations and the ins and outs of these very complicated GPU software. That is the beginning of the problem involving NVIDIA and Jensen Huang. He is one of the greatest business leaders in the world. He should be allowed to do business as he sees fit. Government should not stand in the way, and he should continue to work wonders in America for the benefit of the American people as well as people in the world. So I think even if Jensen Huang got an invitation from the US government to join the delegation, he probably will be very much traumatized because the US government had blocked his way, to sabotage his business with the largest customer of NVIDIA. So I hope we will really know the real lesson about Jensen Huang. I completely sympathize with Jensen Huang, and I can fully understand why NVIDIA was pushed to desperation about how to deal with the US restrictions on the one hand and how to constantly work with the Chinese customers, basically saying, buy my products. And the Chinese customer tell him, but you have US government prohibition. We cannot buy from you. He goes back to Washington. He meets with President Trump again and again. And eventually, I think it's a very sad story. The problem is not on China's side. The problem is the wrong policy initiated by the US government. Now, whether President Trump will really do the right thing this time, not only about Jensen Huang and NVIDIA, I do not know. I hope he will do the right thing. I hope all these restrictions on technological export to China by the United States should be lifted because it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Because the worst for the United States is you force China to become independent and self-reliant. And that will be the real competition. China does not want to engage in such brutal competition with the United States. We are perfectly happy to buy American technologies, but if the United States really wants to force us out of the US market, denying our access to US technologies, do force China to be independent. Jensen Huang and NVIDIA, in my case, is the typical case study of the failure of the U.S. government policy. And I hope
In 2025, Hollywood blockbusters like Zootopia 2 earned nearly half of their global box office from Chinese audiences. Music has also crossed oceans. In 2017, the new Silk Road Explorers fused Chinese folk songs such as Jasmine Flower with American jazz, a dialogue between two musical traditions. In 2023, the Lincoln Center Chamber Music Society returned to China after 4 years, delivering 8 concerts across 6 cities. But the most important bridge is being built by the younger generation.
I am very curious to learn more about the culture and the different foods in the culture and meet more people and see the differences and the similarities between the Chinese and United States culture.
When you learn about the other cultures, it helps you understand it and have more empathy for everyone. Especially now, the world is lots of war and other things.
Let's get back to my guests here in the studio. I believe we only have time for one question. Professor Wan, what about people-to-people exchanges? Do you think that will also be a crucial element on this state visit by Donald Trump?
It is extremely crucial in terms of bringing the relations between China and the United States back to normal. And to a friendly stage, because only when people on both sides, especially young people, understand each other better and sympathize with each other better, can they collectively create more collaboration in future governments, right? And so this is important also because today, many young people who are exposed to social media are information compartmentalized. So in Chinese, we have a saying that hearing something 100 times is not as good as seeing something once, right? So it's important that people-to-people exchange happen. American young people can visit China, study in China. Similarly, Chinese people can travel in the U.S. and study in the U.S. And only through more exchanges can both countries really benefit from each other's culture, fashion, and industries.
All right, gentlemen, fantastic to have both of you on our program today. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. China's silver economy is creating new opportunities, fueling growth in multiple sectors over recent years. At the end of last year, China's Ministry of Civil Affairs, together with 7 other government departments, issued a set of measures to support elderly care providers and drive the silver economy's development. The policy promotes cross-industry coordination and technological integration in the robotics, medical rehabilitation, and smart home sectors, aiming to deliver all-round intelligent elderly care support for senior citizens. CGTN's Bradley Brankenship has more.
The Xi'an City Wall Park rolled out smart devices during the Labor Day holiday to enhance the travel experiences for senior visitors that have strength and mobility issues. The site has built a complete elderly-friendly service system, introducing wearable exoskeleton devices for regular public rental. Powered by intelligent motion sensors, the equipment assists walking and reduces physical burden, making the landmark's hiking route much easier for seniors.
The exoskeleton gives me great assistance. It takes most of the weight when I lift my legs. It's a fresh experience and really high-tech.
In the latest government work report, China vowed to expand inclusive elderly care services and advance the long-term care insurance system. Senior community canteens have become a vital link for elderly services. In Tianjin, they serve as a community hub, matching seniors' huge demand for elderly care with home safety visits, medical accompaniment, in-home rehabilitation, elderly-friendly renovation, and housekeeping services.
For active and self-care seniors, we organize offline activities, such as handicraft classes and smartphone training courses. For those with limited mobility who cannot go out, we provide regular door-to-door services.
Official data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows China's population aged 60 and above was over 323 million in 2025, making up 23% of the population. China's Silver Economy Development Report notes the sector reached 9 trillion yuan in 2025 and is expected to surpass 30 trillion by 2035. As China's elderly population grows, the silver economy is growing to meet it, providing care and dignity. Bradley Blankenship, CGTN.
As of Tuesday, China's 2026 box office revenue surpassed 14 billion yuan, or about $2 billion, boosted by lower ticket prices thanks to subsidies. Total ticket sales during this year's Labor Day holiday, a key movie-going period, rose 1.5% from a year earlier, while the average ticket price fell 8% to approximately 36 yuan, the lowest level in 4 years. Subsidies help drive down prices, with financial institutions and ticketing platforms offering a combined 350 million yuan in discounts as of last week. All right, that is all we have on this edition of China 24. As always, we welcome your thoughts and comments. You can reach us at China24@cgtn.com. Music bridges hearts and youth connect the world. We leave you now with a sweet melody shared by Chinese and American youth. I'm Zheng Shi in Beijing. Thank you so much for watching.
Come everybody, let's just move to the music. From any city you can feel what I'm feeling. Oceans between us, but the sound keeps us breathing. What's there between us that's keeping us so Beijing, LA, what a big difference, but we move the same. We're all the same way, books and games, not the same language, but we move the same. We're all the same way. Songs that we sing and write, they make us strong inside. Surfing through all the tides together on this crazy ride. We'll hold each other's hands, dance till we dance again. Look out for all the friends, 'cause art makes us better. Art makes us better, brings us together. Art makes us better, together and better. Art makes us better, brings us together. Art makes us better, together and better. Art makes us better, brings us together. Art makes us better, together and better. Art makes us better, better together. Art makes us love sing.
Coming up on Global Business, state visit. Beijing welcomes U.S. President Donald Trump on state visit to China. The two heads of state are expected to engage in an in-depth exchange of views on major issues. Supply shock. Eurozone industrial output declines faster than expected in March as continued Middle East conflict pushes up energy costs for factories. rising pressure. Latest monthly reports from the IEA and OPEC indicate global oil stocks falling at record speed amid heightened volatility and uncertainty. It's good evening from Beijing and welcome to this edition of Global Business on CGTN. I'm Lily Lu. U.S. President Donald Trump has arrived in Beijing for a state visit to China. At the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping, Trump is visiting China from May 13th to 15th. This is the two leaders' second face-to-face meeting after they met in Busan, the Republic of Korea, last October. This is also the first visit to China by a U.S. president in 9 years. President Xi and his U.S. counterpart Trump will have an in-depth exchange of views on major issues concerning bilateral relations, world peace, and development. Chinese ambassador to the U.S., Xie Feng, has given an exclusive interview to Newsweek covering U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to China and China-U.S. relations. Ambassador Xie said head of state interactions offer irreplaceable strategic guidance to China-U.S. relations. He said China's 15th five-year plan has not only outlined the roadmap for advancing Chinese modernization in the next 5 years, but also brought rare and major benefits to the world. The plan will also open up vast room for mutually beneficial cooperation between China and the U.S. In terms of trade imbalance, Ambassador Xie said that it is a highly complex issue and should be viewed from a comprehensive perspective. It would be unfair to stress only imbalances in goods trade. For instance, in terms of trading services, the U.S. runs a surplus with most economies. He also said that the allegation regarding China's so-called industrial overcapacity is equally untenable. He said that despite tariff pressure, China's foreign trade expanded last year, with total goods imports and exports reaching a record high, which speaks to the strong demand of the global market for China's industrial capacity. 17 U.S. corporate leaders are reportedly accompanying President Donald Trump to China, with the business delegation focusing heavily on high-tech and finance. Prominent names include Apple's Tim Cook, Tesla's Elon Musk, along with representatives from the aviation and agriculture sectors. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang also joined the delegation, although Huang was not originally on the official list of CEOs traveling with the president. And here is a look at the full list. China-U.S. trade fell nearly 19% in 2025 to around $560 billion, with Chinese exports dropping 20% to $420 billion and imports from the U.S. down almost 15% to $140 billion. That is according to Chinese customs data. The decline deepened in the first quarter of 2026 as bilateral trade fell 16.6% on the year. Chinese exports to the U.S. dropped over 16% as well, while imports from the U.S. fell 17.6%. Despite the downturn, China remained the U.S.'s third largest export destination and third largest import source, while the U.S. is China's top export destination and the third largest source of imports. The two economies together account for more than 1/3 of global GDP and roughly 1/5 of the world's goods trade. From record tariffs to a series of high-level talks, here's a look at the shifting dynamics of China-U.S. trade and their ripple effects across the global economy.
Under U.S. President Donald Trump's first term, trade frictions emerged between the world's two largest economies. By his second term, U.S. tariffs have expanded globally. At its peak, tariffs on Chinese goods reached 145%. that included a 125% reciprocal tariff on top of an earlier 20% fentanyl levy. China responded with a matching 125%. China repeatedly called for tariff disputes to be resolved through dialogue and negotiation. After a brief escalation, both sides agreed in May to reduce the 125% rate to 10%, while setting up a consultation mechanism for regular exchanges on economic and trade concerns. The latest round of talks has just concluded in Seoul. A series of high-level exchanges continued throughout 2025, keeping tariff rates at or below the levels announced in May. Still, China's share of U.S. imports fell below 10% in 2025 as a result of higher tariffs. Entering 2026, Beijing's calls for greater stability and cooperation are increasingly reflected in Washington and among U.S. business communities. For American companies in China, the 2026 outlook improved dramatically, according to a survey by the American Chamber of Commerce in China. On a recent Beijing trip, Apple CEO Tim Cook put it simply: no supply chain is more critical to his company than China. Attention is now focused on whether China and the U.S. can further strengthen ties and bring much-needed certainty to the global economy.
As U.S. President Donald Trump travels to Beijing for meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping, trade and business sit high on the agenda. Tens of thousands of small American businesses are also hoping for a positive outcome. Isabel Diaz reports from Washington, D.C.
Early May brings Small Business Week to America. And in the nation's capital, many small entrepreneurs took the opportunity to push their products at special events. But while their markets may be primarily domestic, like Beverly Perry's Ooh La La Skincare, many have one eye across the world on Beijing this week, looking for an end to the U.S.-led tariff war.
I would say the fact that we have these tariffs that's weighing us down.
In what way?
Well, it's hard to conduct business when you rely on certain products that come from abroad, and the tariffs are affecting the cost.
Perry has seen the cost of her main ingredients skyrocket since last year's unilateral imposition of global tariffs by the Trump administration.
My price has almost doubled for shea butter. It went up almost $200. I was paying maybe $248 for 55 pounds. Now I'm paying $4 or something for the same amount.
Across the country in the Midwest, the story is similar. Beth Beneke runs the Busy Baby product company out of Minnesota. And since the tariffs were imposed last April, her business has been anything but child's play.
The saga of the tariffs has been that I ran out of stock for 2 months. I couldn't ship my products until that tariff came down to 30%, which meant I had no revenue for 2 months, but still all my operating expenses.
This frustration is playing out across the U.S., and as President Xi and President Trump prepare to meet, small business owners and economists alike are hoping that a resumption of Chinese purchases of U.S. goods will be one of the outcomes.
There's a lot of focus on getting China to promise to buy additional U.S. agricultural products, especially soybeans. The U.S. is looking for these quick economic wins that will be felt by certain communities in the U.S., ideally ahead of November election.
Last week, the U.S. president held a small business summit at the White House, telling the audience the U.S. economy is doing well. But high prices, persistent inflation, and tariffs remain challenges. For tens of thousands of people like Beneke and Perry, the China meeting may be far away, but its effects will be felt close to home. Isabella Diaz, CGTN, Washington.
Many U.S. firms remain optimistic about opportunities here in China while hoping for greater stability and predictability in China-U.S. relations. Our reporter Yu Bo-kun spoke with Marjorie Cross, founder and executive chair of APCO, on why she remains bullish on the China market.
We talked about China-U.S. relations back at Davos in January, and you said that stability is very crucial. And now as President Trump visits China, what are businesses hoping to see from this meeting?
I think the messages for both countries, it's important to have the message of stability. And this is no different than what we talked about a little bit earlier. And the reason for that is companies need predictability. And I know from the U.S. end with the tariffs, one day it's this, one day it's that, how much disorientation it provided for the companies. And so I think it's wonderful that they're getting together. The idea of the two people talking together, the two leaders talking together, I think makes everybody more comfortable that there'll be some kind of more normal relationships between China and the U.S.
Well, as a multinational company, what are we seeing on the ground in terms of how U.S. firms are evaluating China's market?
I think that for the U.S. companies, maybe there's a little bit of tug of war between the headquarters and the people on the ground who see so much more opportunity. And so I think for the U.S. companies, if we could come to some framework where it's less political and more economic, I think that would be a really good thing. You know, China is really showing itself to be very innovative in certain areas. And I know a lot of the healthcare innovations, and maybe there's an opportunity for some of the companies to partner. APCO's like a bridge between China and the world and China. So we've come up with this idea of like a multi-local company. You know, we talk about multinational, but it gives the idea that really these companies need to learn to be multi-local and know how to deal differently in each area.
APCO has been in China for a decade, and as Chinese market continue to evolve, what is the longer strategy here?
Well, we are very bullish on continuing our work in China. And I think that we see the Chinese market as one where there's a lot of opportunities for these companies that are becoming these multinationals or multi-locals. Both economies are so important to the world that if we could find some ways to partner, it would be so important for the future. And also, I think the world is really dependent on these two big economies also paying attention to the rest of the world and how what they do can be helpful and elevate the quality of life.
You're watching Global Business on CGTN. Still to come on the program. Latest monthly reports from the IEA and OPEC indicate global oil stocks falling at record speed amid heightened volatility and uncertainty.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Here is a quick check on some other business headlines from around the world. We start with Japan. The number of corporate bankruptcies in the country with liabilities more than $64,000 rose 6.6% from a year earlier to 883 in April, a local research firm Tokyo Shoko said on Wednesday. Now, it added that disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz would further increase business costs and worsen Japan's business environment. The Eurozone's industrial output contracted 2.1% on year in March, and that is a steeper decline compared with the previous month, and also worse than expected. It came as the ongoing Middle East conflict pushed up energy costs for factories. The U.S. Official Producer Price Index, a key gauge for factory gate prices, went up by 6% in April compared with last year. Now, that is faster than expected and also an acceleration from March. European shares rose on Wednesday, recovering from a sharp drop in Brent for July, rose by 3.42% to $107.77 a barrel. In base metals, copper extended its winning streak to 8 consecutive sessions, breaking above $14,000 a ton on the London Metal Exchange. And the latest copper price was $14,090.2 per ton, just shy of January's record peak of $14,527.5. In the meantime, as of 12:30 GMT, gold prices remained elevated near all-time highs, with the latest quoting at $4,680.1 per ounce. Now that is supported by persistent Middle East geopolitical uncertainty and safe haven demand. The United Arab Emirates crude supply increased by 340,000 barrels per day to 2.4 million in April, according to the International Energy Agency's monthly report released on Wednesday. The increase came after the UAE left OPEC in early May, with most ships loading from the Fujairah port located outside the Strait of Hormuz. Global oil inventories are draining at record pace, the IEA warned. Stockpiles fell by nearly 4 million barrels per day in April, more than the combined oil consumption of the UK and Germany. And since the outbreak of the Middle East conflict, global oil inventories have shrunk by nearly 250 million barrels. The IEA estimates that even if the Strait of Hormuz flows partially resume by June, 2026 global oil supply will still fall short of demand by 1.78 million barrels per day. Now, for more details on the oil market fluctuations, let's bring in Professor Liu Baochen, Dean at Center for Business Ethics, University of International Business and Economics. Professor Liu, thank you so much for joining us on the program. So, we're just looking at the monthly reports from the IEA and OPEC showing a sharp supply-demand imbalance, record inventory drawdowns. That is, of course, amid intensified uncertainty risks in the Strait of Hormuz, especially after the UAE's exit from the OPEC+. So just from the latest data from those two reports, how would you interpret the impacts of UAE's withdrawal?
Well, it is understandable for UAE to make their voluntary decision to withdraw from the OPEC+, because they consider that this is really a golden opportunity for them to cash in on the global oil price spikes. And also they have their pipelines that can really bypass the disrupted the Strait of Hormuz. However, at least in the near term, such sort of withdrawal will disrupt the cohesion of the OPEC as a cartel, and to be able to sabotage to a certain extent in terms of the partnership with Saudi Arabia, and also the discipline of the entire OPEC cartel. And so, therefore, it sends more of a signal of volatility than stability, because they also have a far larger portion that has to pass the Strait of Hormuz. Nowadays, it is not really the reserves that's really matter a great deal, but rather the disruption of the choke points that is there to block and disrupt the maritime transport routes. So if this issue remain, the UAE's withdrawal or unilateral increase of their oil supply, so that's really the core issue that's lying over there.
We know that the Strait of Hormuz disruption is not just affecting crude oil, but also petrochemicals and other key industrial supplies. So on the back of this, tight global fossil fuel supply, what role does China's relatively stable energy system and resilient industrial supply chain play?
You're very right, because many industrial sectors are directly or indirectly interlinked with the oil supply and also oil, the refinery. Now China is still dependent, by more than 70% of the global oil supply. However, China has really occupied strategic advantages as to how to absorb the external shocks. One way to do it is that China has already, over the years, built the multiple supply routes and multiple maritime routes. So therefore, we are not really stuck with only one regional disruption. And more importantly, China is really stepping up its efforts on renewable energy, and that's something important in for any marginal increase of our renewable energy supply, be it wind power or the solar power. It's there to reduce the dependence on the external supply, and China has a very complete industrial system where we do not have to rely on the secondary supply of those accessories in the entire oil processing supply chain, etc. So therefore, China really stand out to be able to maintain its national oil security and energy supply, and it as the last baseline that we have enough energy power that can be supplied through the refined coal supply. So this is something that's gave China more of the confidence, and more importantly, it's also there to send more stabilizing force across the world, particularly for those trading partners who are dependent on singular or very few supplies of those energy parts.
Now, that said, energy does come in various forms today. So how can China's overseas deployment of, let's say, solar PV, wind power, energy storage, or UHV technologies help to accelerate a global energy transition?
Yes, China is undisputably the largest producer of those renewable energy devices. For example, we are there to work very closely, particularly with the Belt and Road countries and also with Europe on addressing climate change by supplying our equipment, technology, and also deployment services over there. So because normally these renewables, the sources of power are really detached from those, the industrial base or major cities. So transmission becomes utterly important, that the technology that China is using for the ultra high voltage transmission is also very crucial for them to be able to maintain the important distributional power grids. And also for those smaller and less developed countries, the Chinese solar panels can really supply the community without really a complicated process of attaching to big power grids. So this gave people more flexibility and also for community development. So therefore, China's role is there to contribute to the global stability, not only in the energy supply, but also on the macro stability of economies, and also there to help to reduce the possibility of further inflationary factors.
All right, thank you so much for your insights. That's Professor Liu Baochun from UIBE for us. Well, the U.S. and Iran conflict is sending shockwaves beyond the Middle East, driving up global fuel prices and forcing countries to rethink about their energy security strategy. And Thailand, one of Asia's largest energy importers, is feeling the pinch, with rising electricity costs leaving households and businesses increasingly exposed. But the crisis is also accelerating to a shift to renewables. Demand for rooftop solar panels is surging across the country, and much of it powered by Chinese technology. Dusita Salkawi reports.
Across homes and warehouses in this sun-drenched country, the blue-black glow of solar panels is spreading. The conflict involving Iran has done what years of climate pledges struggled to achieve, turned solar from a choice into a necessity. Griang Grai's family is one of a growing number of Thai households turning to solar energy as a global crisis reshapes decisions at home.
We've been looking into this for a while, but we only made the decision now because electricity prices keep going up.
Thailand relies heavily on imported liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to power its electricity grid, making the country highly vulnerable to global energy price volatility. Now, the government is accelerating its push toward renewables. Homeowners can sell excess power back to the grid with guaranteed rates, while tax incentives help offset installation costs. Energy experts say the timing is critical.
Import LNG is especially dense from the area in the Arab Gulf, and that is a straight impact to the electricity vulnerability of Thailand. So the government is really concerned about the shortage of these energies. We have studied that every 2,000 megawatt of installation of solar rooftop, around maybe 300,000 households, we can reduce the LNG import by 5 to 7%.
That policy push is now translating into real demand. Solar companies say business has surged in recent months as households rush to lock in long-term savings.
This year, the increase has been huge, over 100%. And that's not even counting the projects where we're out of stock and can't install or have to wait for availability.
And as installations rise, one country is powering much of the shift. Climb onto rooftops across Thailand, and most panels carry the same label, Made in China. Inside this warehouse, solar panels are stacked floor to ceiling. All of this is from China. Chinese companies dominate this market, accounting for the vast majority of solar infrastructure across Thailand. It's cheaper, increasingly innovative, and backed by a supply chain built for speed and scale. What happens at Griang Grai's home is simple. Generate, use, save, and sell back. Scale that across the nation, and it becomes something larger. A transformation of Thailand's energy future, driven by crisis and increasingly powered by the sun. Dusita Saokao, CGTN, Bangkok, Thailand.
And with that, I'm wrapping up this edition of Global Business. Please remember you can follow us on social media platforms including Facebook, X, and YouTube. And also, Global Business is available on major podcast apps. I'm Lily Lu in Beijing. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
The world holds its breath for the meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump in Beijing. How could the visit shape the future trajectory of the world's two largest economies, and how will this impact the wider international landscape? Welcome to this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. a lot can happen in 9 years. U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to arrive in Beijing on Wednesday to begin his 3-day state visit, which includes meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping. It is the first visit by a U.S. president in almost 10 years, with many describing it as having the potential to determine the relationship between the world's two largest economies over the next decade. What exactly has changed and what remains the same since President Trump's last visit in November 2017? How will this visit impact the future trajectory of China-US relations? And in a world undergoing profound changes and uncertainty, can it offer a beacon of hope and stability? Welcome to this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you live from the Chinese capital. Joining us to unpack all this, we have from Singapore, George Yeo, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, and here in the Beijing studio, Zhao Hai, Director of International Political Studies at the National Institute for Global Strategy. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. Mr. Yeo, let me go to you first. Now, this is the first visit to China by a U.S. president in almost 9 years, as I said. What is the biggest thing that has changed in the international landscape?
Well, China has become relatively stronger. During the COVID years, China has established itself as the dominant manufacturer in the world. And the US has gotten embroiled in the war in Ukraine and wars in the Middle East and really bogged down. Trump is back, so both sides have a better measure of it. And probably in a better position now to negotiate in a win-win.
In a statement ahead of President Trump's visit on Monday, China's foreign ministry spokesperson said China stands ready to work with the U.S. to expand cooperation and manage differences in the spirit of equality, respect and mutual benefit, and provide more stability and certainty for a transforming and volatile world. Mr. Zhao, what are the priorities of both sides during this visit? What's China expecting? What's the U.S. looking for?
Well, first of all, I think both sides are looking forward to a more stable relationship. That's been stated on both sides. China is pursuing a stable, healthy, and win-win relationship, bilateral relationship. The United States also looking forward to a more stable bilateral relationship. Other than that, I think both sides have different priorities. For the United States, and particularly for President Trump, he wants to make this visit a political victory for himself. Therefore, he's looking for his domestic agendas, looking at fentanyl issues, immigration, and also he's looking forward for more purchase from the Chinese side, and also for a more relaxation perhaps on the rare earths export control. For the Chinese side, of course, there's many talk about triple T's. On the issue of Taiwan, tariff, and technology, China also wanted to stabilize the cross-Taiwan Strait relationship, asking the United States to make clear of its one China policy. And also on tariff, there's still danger of raising tariff on the U.S. side. There's uncertainty as well. On technology, of course, China wished that the U.S. do not use the excuse of national security, impose more export controls on chips and on other technology-related other technologies. So overall, there are many, many issues on the table for the two top leaders to talk about. But in terms of the top priority, I again emphasize that for the foreseeable future, stability is not only what bilaterally important, but also for the world.
And a very interesting detail that everybody noticed is that when President Trump boarded the plane heading east, he chose to wear a yellow tie. What do you think is the message he wants to send there?
He's choosing this tie to show that he's coming to China and he wants to have a good relationship with China.
Yeah, it is indeed interesting. But everybody is asking, some people are not so expecting so much. So, Mr. Zhao, to what extent do you think China and the United States can cooperate, given, you know, the past few years of fluctuating ties, but slowly stabilizing, we have to say, and in what areas realistically can we expect?
Well, I think that's a very good question because realistically, I think there's a limited area where China and U.S. can work together, but they should work together on many, many issues because the two countries are two biggest economies in the world, two largest powers that are both in UN Security Council. They have major, what we call major country responsibilities for the world, facing common challenges in terms of the AI regulation, in terms of global public health, in terms of many of the important issues, regional geopolitical issues, and economic systemic issues. They both have a long list of potential areas of cooperation. But of course, right now, as we all know, that the U.S. side is using a lot of national security excuses, and there is a very, a poisonous domestic political environment in Washington, D.C. that are trying to put a hold on many of the cooperations, and including the people-to-people exchanges. So I think looking forward, if we can, have this top leadership negotiations going more smoothly, and they can lead the way and guide this relationship towards a more cooperative areas, expanding those areas, I think that will be good news for both the people of two countries and also, again, for the world.
Mr. Yu, let me try to reach you. What do you think of the choice of yellow, by the way, by accident, by coincidence? I'm also wearing yellow here. What do you think of the choice of yellow, President Trump's tie, when he embarks on the plane heading to Beijing? And secondly, what realistic areas of cooperation can we expect coming out of this trip?
Trump wants a good visit. China wants a good visit too. But Trump probably needs it more than China. And he's got midterms coming up. He's got a lot of problems at home. So good relations with China will make his other problems easier to resolve. So he wants a good visit, and he's showing by the words he's spoken in the last few months, in his comments about China and President Xi Jinping, that he wants better relations. You see, the problem is this, that there are important Americans who see the future in zero-sum terms, that it's either China winning or the U.S. winning. And if this is a mentality, then short-term decisions are guided by this long-term consideration. Trump doesn't share this view that the future must be zero-sum. And because of that, it's good that China deals with him and tries to do as much as possible while he's still in office. But the future will still be uncertain because this mindset in the U.S. that it's either the U.S. or China in the future, that is very negative. China, of course, doesn't take that view. China has to keep on working at it. It's not something which will go away overnight.
Mr. Yu, would you clarify your understanding of what is China's view or China's vision of its relationship vis-a-vis the United States?
Well, China's long-term view is the world is big enough to accommodate not only the U.S. and China, but other countries in the world. That we share a common destiny, that it's better if we work towards cooperation, benefit one another, and all progress together. This China's consistent view of the world and its future. And we need that, because without that, we will be fighting one another to the end of time.
What kind of tangible benefits do you think this trip is going to bring to the American people who are watching this very closely, Mr. Yu?
I think for ordinary people, economics is the most important. And if we're able to stabilize the trade agenda, costs will go down in the U.S. Ordinary Americans will benefit immediately. And if the U.S. can allow and attract Chinese investments in the U.S., big investments, this will help ordinary Americans. There's a tendency to see everything in national security terms, but sometimes our fears overwhelm our actions, and that's not good for anybody. But I see the possibility now, especially with Trump bringing a delegation of very important American business leaders, for a positive agenda to be established economically, not only in trade, but in investments and in greater bilateral cooperation.
Mr. Yu, let me stay with you for this question. How important is the issue is the question of Taiwan for China? Do you think the ordinary American really grasp the importance of this issue, and how do you see Taiwan being featured during this upcoming summit?
No, I think China has made its position on Taiwan very clear. There's a bright red line on Taiwan, which the Americans are aware of. If they want to poke China, they'll move towards the red line. If they want better cooperation with China, they move away from the red line. And China has made it clear that Taiwan is not for negotiation. You take your position on Taiwan, and China will react accordingly. So I believe there's already some understanding on Taiwan, and if Trump wants the positive agenda to be enlarged, then he can be more accommodating on Taiwan, which I believe he may be. I mean, there's talk about arms sales to Taiwan. It's not just quantity, but also quality. And China has a hold on U.S. defense companies because those companies which supply arms to Taiwan can be denied rare earths and other critical materials. And for them, Taiwan is not their most important market. So China has a hold on these companies. So some arms sales will take place. Question is what quantity and of what quality? And I believe because Trump wants a good visit to China, and he has many things on his mind beyond Taiwan, I think the discussion on Taiwan will not be too tense.
Professor Zhao Hai, how do you see the importance? Maybe this is not be the bulk of the discussion, but how important it is to keep in mind and what to keep in mind when we talk about the Taiwan question?
Well, just like our guest told us that Taiwan issue is China's core national interest, and is the red line is very clear. American side understand this, and I think the important thing is that many in America worried that Trump would make some commitments while he was visiting China that would hurt its alliance system or making people believe that the U.S. is no longer taking responsibilities in terms of deterrence. But I think that's the opposite is true. If China-U.S. stabilize the relationship, that is the best news for Western Pacific, for the regional stability. And only those people who want to promote like Taiwan independence or promote China-U.S. rivalry would be happy to see that on the Taiwan issue that the U.S. and China will have a larger divide.
Why is the weapon sales such an important question that China must demand on President Trump to stop? Very briefly.
Well, number one, this is part of the three communique. That is the foundation of China-U.S. political relationship. The U.S. committed to decrease sales of arms to Taiwan. And secondly, the increase not only in terms of the amount, but also the quantity of those weapons are very offensive and pointing to deter China's ability to deter Taiwan independence. So therefore, I think China insists that the United States decrease the total number and also the type of weapons sold to Taiwan, not to encourage Taiwan independence.
Let's talk about the business delegations which will accompany President Trump on the trip. And a lot of people have been talking about 16 prominent U.S. business executives such as Tesla, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, Apple's Tim Cook, and BlackRock's Larry Fink. Mr. Zhao here in the studio, how do you look at the composition of this delegation? What does that tell you about the kind of message that President Trump wants to send?
Well, this team is relatively small, but very important because these are key companies coming from the United States that have very deep ties with the Chinese market. I would divide this into two parts. One is those companies that are looking forward to a more stable supply chain. And we're looking at the previous exchanges, tariff, all those kinds of disturbance and uncertainty. I think these companies will see more stability between the two sides. And the second part is more of on the side of market access. You include financial companies, companies selling cars, some companies selling energies and agriculture companies, and those companies are looking at this large Chinese market, and they wanted to be part of this. So I think combined, you can see that the globalization, or normally this bilateral economic relationship, is still very much the ballast of the bilateral relationship, and President Trump understands the importance.
Mr. Yu, my final question. One detail here is one of the entourage is the leader of Micron Technology, which is an advanced chip maker. He is actually behind a very important piece of bill that aims to encircle China in terms of providing China with advanced chip making equipment from allies of the United States. So this company is pushing for kneecapping China in terms of its chip manufacturing capability. Why is President Trump bringing him on board this time too?
Well, China has shown that when the U.S. denies the technology, China will redouble efforts to create its own technology and become independent of the U.S. So the more you shut China out, the more you may be in danger in the future, because China will become a competitor. So this is the dilemma which U.S. technology companies face. And the debate within Micron, I don't believe it's just within Micron, because U.S. national security will have a big say in this matter, is part of this dilemma which has to be overcome. And Trump, because he doesn't see a necessary zero-sum future for U.S.-China relations, he wants a deal, practical accommodation of each other's interests.
All right. A lot to unpack, but certainly we'll bring you the very latest and the analysis of the upcoming visit over the next few days. For now, many thanks to my guests Giorgio and Zhao Hai joining us from Singapore and here in the studio. When we come back, why is this upcoming meeting taking place now, and how are both sides going into the talks that could shape the next decade? Stay tuned.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point.
President Donald Trump is starting a state visit to the Chinese capital on Wednesday. What does this visit mean for China-U.S. relations? How does China see things? And what is the U.S.'s position toward China? What impact could President Trump's visit have on bilateral relations and the wider international landscape? I sat down with Wu Xingbo, Dean of the Institute of International Studies and Director of the Center for American Studies at Fudan University in Shanghai. I began by asking him how China views its relations with the U.S.
On the one hand, we still want to, promote cooperation with the U.S. because we think that is good for China, that is good for the U.S., and it's good for the rest of the world. But on the other hand, we should not be too naive, because the U.S. has already taken on China as a major competitor. So we have to learn how to compete with the U.S. You have to fight when the other side is ready to fight. So I think the Chinese approach to the U.S., is just like a coin with two sides. One side is cooperation and coordination. The other side is competition and even conflict. And we should be prepared for both. Of course, from a Chinese perspective, we always hope that in this relationship, we should have more cooperation than competition. We should have more coordination than friction. But at the end of the day, that is not just up to China to decide. It has to get Washington to respond to China's initiative as well.
What is President Trump's view and strategy toward China, despite the public rhetorics, and especially compared with previous administrations, or even with his own, first term? How has President Trump's approach towards China changed?
In my observation, in the second Trump administration, President Trump has gone through a learning curve. At the very beginning, he somewhat looked down upon China, and he believed, as advised by some of his hawkish advisors, that the best way to deal with China is to keep pushing China, to pressure China. That is why he started the tariff war at the very beginning of the second administration. However, as China fought back and the US retreated, Trump began to realize that China is more powerful and resourceful than he realizes. And also the Chinese leaders and the public as well are more determined to fight back against US pressure. So Trump began to have a fresh look at China. At the same time, he also has learned something new about the nature of China-US relations. In the past, he tended to view this relationship as a zero-sum game. But after several rounds of fight and talk and compromise and trade-off, he began to realize, well, maybe this relationship is not necessarily a zero-sum thing by nature. And if the U.S. cooperate with China, maybe the U.S. can benefit from the process. And this will make the U.S. Stronger, better, and more prosperous.
And for an outsider, for instance, watching this, people who are not in the United States, who are not U.S. citizens, for instance, for anyone who is watching this from, another part of the world, what could a successful trip bring to them in tangible terms?
Well, for those from the Midwest in the U.S., they will say China purchasing more and more U.S. agricultural products, so that is good for their business. For the young people who want to purchase the Chinese-produced EVs, which is very cost-effective, they will pay much less when they want to get a fancy EV car in the future. Now, for those in the financial market or around the world, if there's a good visit coming out of this summit, you will see a big surge in the market in the next several months. So everyone will benefit from it. As saying goes, rising tide lifts all boats. After all, China and the US are the two largest economies in the world. If they get along well with each other, that's the best news to the entire world.
How about those who have been potentially impacted or who have been impacted as a result of the shift towards China of U.S. manufacturing? Those who are in the traditional car producing industry, for instance, in the United States, are they going to feel happy as well about a successful trip and about a potential deal to open the market access towards Chinese-made EVs?
Well, I hope the U.S. will, open its market wider for Chinese investment, not just for EV producers, but also for many other sectors in the manufacturing industry. President Trump wants to reinvigorate U.S. manufacturing industry, but he cannot get this done without China's assistance. If the U.S. open arms to the Chinese investment in U.S. manufacturing sector, then many people, including those employed in the traditional manufacturing industry, they could benefit very much from the process. After all, China is the largest manufacturing power in the world, and we can produce many stuff that can be quality and low cost.
Finally, what other items may be on China's wish list? Because just now we talked a lot about what President Trump is eyeing from this trip. But what is China eyeing on this trip besides exporting, Chinese-made NEVs to the United States? What is China's expectations from the success of this visit?
Well, in addition to the Taiwan issue, in trade and economics, China wants less tariff, less sanctions against Chinese entities, less export controls over, semiconductors or other important articles that we have been importing from the U.S., less restrictions on two-way investments. So that's what China would expect in trade economics. In another area, which is very much important to me as a university professor, is that we want to see less obstacles imposed by the U.S. to people exchanges. Today, the cultural and educational exchanges between China and U.S. have been seriously strained. First, many Chinese scholars including have suffered from this kind of policy. In the long term, that's only going to couple the people-to-people ties between two countries, and that undermines the mutual understanding that
was Professor Wu Xingbo, Dean of the Institute of International Studies, Director of the Center for American Studies at Fudan University. With that, we come to the end of this edition with Media. As always, you can follow me on Facebook, X, and on behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching.
from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the program. Our top stories. President Trump lands in China for the summit with President Xi, joined by a business delegation of millionaires. Other headlines: China calls the latest trade talks with the candid, in-depth and constructive as the two sides meet in Korea ahead of Trump's visit. And security in global shipping dominates a major conference in London as the deadlock in the Strait of Hormuz continues. President Trump has arrived in China for the highly anticipated summit with President Xi Jinping. He touched down in Beijing, accompanied by U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and a delegation featuring some of the world's most famous CEOs, including Elon Musk, Tim Cook, and Jensen Huang. Mr. Trump's arrival follows the latest trade talks between the two sides in South Korea. Our correspondent Zhao Yunfei reports.
This is anticipated on both sides. U.S. President Donald Trump has landed here at Beijing Capital International Airport for a state visit. It's the first time a U.S. president has visited China in almost 9 years. The last time was November 2017 during Trump's first term in the White House. This time, Trump reports that the U.S. has a massive relationship with China as he looks forward to exchanges with President Xi Jinping. According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the two leaders will have in-depth exchanges of views on major issues concerning bilateral relations, world peace, and development. During their last meeting in Busan, President Xi told President Trump that the two sides should think big and recognize the long-term benefits. Analysts say trade and technology are on the agenda. It's also an important moment for the two sides to touch upon security issues to avoid miscalculation.
It is of key importance that both sides be on the same page for important issues. And witness the developments of the relationship in the past few decades, especially for the economic cooperation as well as for people-to-people exchange. But we also witnessed some difficult times of the relationship. So this is a critical moment for China and the United States to focus on cooperation, especially for trade and economic issues. And at the same time, both sides should talk about how to move on or together along with each other.
This is a key moment for both China and the U.S. to communicate and manage differences. China says the stability of size of the world's two largest economies based on the spirit of equality, respect, and mutual benefit will bring more certainty for a transforming world. 赵云飞 CGTN 北京。
Well, let's get one from our correspondent in Beijing. And what is Beijing expecting from this visit by China following the trade talks in South Korea?
Yes, Jeremy, Chinese officials said the two sides held candid, in-depth, and constructive consultations on economic and trade issues of mutual concern, and further expanding practical cooperation. And the timing of this new round of talks just before the U.S. president's visit to China, no serves a clear purpose, narrow differences on economic issues, so that leaders here focus on strategic direction rather than dwelling on tariffs or export lists. And in China's view, some diplomacy works best when lower-level mechanisms have already done the groundwork, and the consultation in Seoul was exactly that. It's trade calibration. And on Wednesday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said the two heads of the state will have exchanges of views here on major issues concerning bilateral relations as well as a global peace and development. It also added that China stands ready to work with the United States in the spirit of equality, mutual respect, and mutual benefit to expand cooperation and more stability and certainty in new turbulent and changing world. And through summits over the past year, China has reaffirmed the same basic principle that is dialogue, confrontation, and cooperation over decoupling. And we have already seen some of the cooperation facts on the ground, such as military hotlines resumed, working groups on economy, counter narcotics, and climate established, and even a new dialogue mechanism or artificial intelligence. And the summit itself is designed to provide strategic direction and create dynamic to build on these gains. And with mentioning after two presidents meet tomorrow morning, they are expected to visit the symbolic place here in Beijing, Temple Heaven. Historically, it was where Chinese emperors pray for good harvests and harmony between heaven and earth. And hosting a U.S. president here signals a desire for stability, for harmonious coexistence, and it is a soft but powerful reminder that major powers like China and the United States can choose to work together rather than escalation. And it's something diplomacy will continue to serve as top design that keeps the relationship on track. And China also sees this Trump visit as one more step in a long run with a strong willingness to cooperate where interests align for both, and particularly a more important chapter in Chinese relations.
Thank you. Our correspondent Joe Jiashin. Well, that's the briefing from China. Let's take next to the United States. And to our correspondent Nick Harper in Washington. Nick, a late addition to what was already a heavyweight delegation at the passenger list. The first time the U.S. Defense Secretary has traveled to China with the U.S. President since that first visit back in, I think it was 1972.
Very often. Last time it happened was when Richard Nixon was the president back in 1972, more than 50 years ago. Pete Hegseth, it's his first trip to China as Defense Secretary, also the first time that the US Defense Secretary has visited China in nearly 8 years. So what does it say of the East region as well? And then there's the Indo-Pacific region, which is still a key national security priority for the United States when it comes to the military perspective. And the US is long-term objective to try and counter China within the region. And then those billionaires that will be heading to China as well. About 19 CEOs, I believe, on the list at this stage, including Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA. In addition to the list, we've also got Tim Cook of Apple, Elon Musk, Tesla, Larry Fink of BlackRock, Boeing and Meta CEOs as well. The fact that NVIDIA's CEO is taking part in this trip makes it very clear that AI is important for this trip. We could even see the reduction of some
in the United States, and what are the expectations?
Well, I think low expectations overall, but if anything, from a US perspective, the hope is that personal relationship can be reinforced between the two leaders. Essentially, not just that nothing goes wrong, but also that two men can show that they do have warmer relations after something of a difficult year, especially when it comes to some of those trade and tariff disputes we've had. Donald Trump, he is under domestic pressure here in the US, made a key constituent group, farmers across the US. Many of them are Republicans, and many of them have been hit hard as a result of his trade war around the world. So he will need to get that deal done and get China buying more soybeans overall. And I guess we also have seen a change of attitude in the last year in the way that many Americans view China. There's been a softening of an approach in the way that they view China. We've seen about a 6% increase in a positive opinion from Americans in one poll, now up to 27% of Americans say they view China positively. Much of that is down to a growing confidence in President Xi, but also at a time when the US, I guess, has looked for more collaboration with China, not just viewed it as a competitive relationship.
Nick, thank you. Our correspondent Nick Harper in Washington. Well, the key focus of Mr. Trump's visit, let's look at the bilateral trade between the two countries. April saw a healthy rise in exports compared to last year. Chinese exports to the United States up over 11% to almost $37 billion. US exports to China increased over 9% to over $13.5 billion. That's the Chinese trade surplus of $23 billion. However, the picture for the first quarter is less positive. That's buoyant April. The continued fallout from President Trump's tariffs saw quarter one bilateral trade fall by 16.6%. In contrast, China's trade with the rest of the world was higher in the first quarter. Exports totaled well over $1.5 trillion. That 50% increase is thanks to growing business with Southeast Asia, South America, Africa, and Europe. Well, tens of thousands of small American businesses are also hoping for a positive outcome from this visit. Our correspondent Isabella reports.
Early May brings Small Business Week to America, and in the nation's capital, many small entrepreneurs took the opportunity to push their products at special events. While other markets may be primarily domestic, like beverages, skincare, may have one eye across the world on Beijing this week, looking for an end to the U.S.-led tariff war.
I would say the fact that we have these tariffs that's weighing us down. In what way? Well, it's hard to
conduct business when you rely on certain products that